Hello and welcome to the studio. On this channel I share my writing process, projects and create crafts inspired by my stories. Today I'm going to be making some flowers out of crepe paper and writing a short story. I'm starting in my journal by making a sketch of the flowers I want to make. They will be fantasy flowers, so not based on any real varieties, and I'm just going to make them up as I go along. This story today was in part inspired by the art of making fabric and paper flowers. Fabric flowers were very popular in the Victorian era. They would have been used to decorate bonnets, dresses, interiors and more. Think of all the large hats that women would have worn during this period, and the elaborate flowers and ribbons used to decorate them. Not surprisingly, perhaps, Victorian London had a large industry of flower makers. The fabric flowers would be made by hand, the petals stamped out with a cutter, painted different colours and shaded, and then each petal was shaped individually with a tool that had a small ball-like end. When all the pieces were ready, the flowers were then assembled. I found an interesting video online about the last of the flower makers. The gentleman is interviewed by his son and shows some of his tools and describes how he learnt to make fabric flowers and how his business had gone over the years. I will put a link to it in the description box below, as it's a fascinating watch if you're interested. I didn't have the supplies to try making fabric flowers, so I chose crepe paper for the project today, as I already had some on hand. Crepe paper itself dates back to around the 1890s. It was particularly popular in the 1920s and the 1930s, where it was used for making flowers, used for making party decorations, and even fancy dress costumes. I wouldn't have thought to make outfits that you wear out of crepe paper, but people did, especially outfits for children's parties and Halloween. As I knew I wanted to set this story in Victorian London, it made more historical sense to use fabric flowers in the text instead of crepe. So the craft project does not exactly match the story today. At some point I would like to make some fabric flowers, but that project will have to wait for another time. The Desktop Garden, a short story by Ida Williams. It was raining. Not the light drizzle of a spring day or a summer's evening's hazy mist. No, that day in mid-October it was bucketing down. Anne watched the rain hitting the pavement stones outside and pooling into murky puddles. The horses looked miserable as they pulled the carriages along the road, their ears set back. The cab drivers flicked the reins and kept their heads down, the water rushing off the turned-up brims of their hats. Pulling the curtains closed, Anne drew the shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sun had been absent for days, and the fleet of grey clouds seemed to permanently hover above the chimneys of the city. Spring felt a world away. A soft knock tapped on the bedroom door, and a grey head popped in. "Are you feeling better, dear?" "Yes, Gran, much better." "That's good. Most things like that pass quickly, but do sit. You need to rest in your condition." Anne smiled and obediently did as she was told, returning to her seat on the small sofa as the older woman entered the room carrying a small box. "I almost forgot. I picked these up for you yesterday. Thought they would cheer up the room a bit." "I think I'll be able to come down for dinner tonight," said Anne, taking the box and placing it on her lap. "I'm sure you will. A light dinner, mind you. I'll tell Carrie to make you some broth. I'll come help set the table before John gets home." She made a move to get up again, but her grandmother placed a firm hand on her shoulder. No, dear. Now sit. I'll take care of the house." With that final command, she left, long skirt rustling as she went. Anne could hear her grandmother calling for the maid as she headed downstairs. Left alone, she looked down at the box. It felt quite light. Gently she removed the lid and brought out a bunch of fabric flowers, beautiful deep red poppies and yellow dandelions, pale orange tulips, long sprigs of lavender, and blushed pink roses. Anne ran her fingers over the bouquet. Clustering together, they were a colourful chorus from a country garden caught in full bloom. Setting down the flowers on the table in front of her, she picked back up the knitting needles and misshapen bundle of yarn. There was plenty of work to do while waiting for spring, when real flowers and a much more precious arrival would grace the house. Until then, the little desktop garden would accompany her through the rest of winter. The end. I don't know exactly why, but when I started working on this story, I couldn't get this rainy Victorian day setting out of my head, so I just went with that. I thought it would work well to make the scene feel as gentle and as cosy as possible, with a couple of different contrasts. The miserable cold, rainy day outside and Anne not feeling too well, contrasted with the warmth of her grandmother looking after her and giving her the gift. I also wanted to use the story today to, again, contrast the unmoving nature of fake flowers with the flow of life. Artificial flowers are permanent even as the seasons move on around them. They are a little bit of nature caught forever. The flowers in the story could also act as a sign of change to come, a reminder of spring in the winter, and this is especially poignant for the main character as she's currently waiting and looking forward to spring and everything that will bring her. I ended up trying to balance the story between the dialogue among the two women and then the flowers themselves having a central role towards the end of the scene. I hope you enjoyed the video and the story today. Feel free to leave a comment below the video and say hello. You can find me on Instagram at Meadow Afternoon, and you can also see more of my work over on my website. Thank you for stopping by, and see you next time.